Yo, Shortbox Nation, this is Botter, and I'm here to tell you right now that con season starts early this year with the return of Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and sci-fi event, Collective Con. That's right, Northeast Florida's largest pop culture convention returns for its 10th year on March 8th through the 10th at the Prime Osborne Center in Jacksonville, Florida. 10 years of Collective Con, they're pulling all the stops out to make sure this is a can't-miss event. And the guest list they got going, don't even get me started on the guest list. I mean, they've got A-list celebrity guests and voice actors from some of your favorite movies, anime, and video games like Elijah Wood and Sean Ashton, Ray Park, Trisha Helfer, Ross Marquand, Max Middleman, and Bo-Katan herself will be there, Katie Sackhoff. Ooh. Tell me what other convention is giving you the opportunity to meet Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings, Darth Maul, and One Punch Man all under the same roof. Oh my goodness. Only at Collective Con. And if you're looking to get some of your favorite comics signed, or if you want to get an original sketch from some of the best comic artists in the world, well, you're in luck, because there'll be plenty of comic and creator guests there, like DC comic artist extraordinaire Clay Mann, Harvey Award-nominated illustrator John Taylor Christopher, Marvel and DC cover artist Chris Stevens, and acclaimed Star Wars author Timothy Zahn. They'll all be at Collective Con this year. And if you're looking to bring the family, or if you want to make a weekend out of it, you're in luck, because there'll be so much going on at Collective Con that weekend in the form of vendors, fan panels, video game tournaments, cosplay contests, after parties, and a bunch of fan events. You can purchase single and 3-day weekend passes now using the link in this episode's show notes, or by going to collectivecon.com to book your tickets and hotel. Buy your tickets now, and I'll see you at Collective Con, March 8th through the 10th. Now let's start the show. Yo, Shortbox Nation. How you doing today? And to new listeners joining us for the first time, welcome to the Shortbox Podcast. My name is Botter, and I'm here to welcome all of you to a special bonus episode. It's special because this was originally a Patreon episode that has now been unlocked, all right? Our patrons have been sitting on this one and had the privilege of enjoying it a month ago, all right? So this is old news to them. It was finally time to unlock this episode so everyone gets to enjoy it. This episode you're about to enjoy is audio from the second panel I hosted at HeroesCon back in June. This panel features comic and fantasy illustrator Charles Vess, who you might know from his work with Neil Gaiman on titles like Sandman and Stardust. I mean, the guy's been a real certified OG in the comic book game since before I could even spell comic books. Also on this panel was David Petersen, the creator of the well-loved Mouse Guard series and artist for the illustrated version of the classic children's novel, The Wind in the Willows. Now, for the next hour, you'll get to actually hear from these two masters of the medium, chat about the intricacies of world building, their approach to illustrating fantasy genre comics, and their best advice for aspiring comic creators. So if any of that piques your interest, you're in the right place, especially if you are someone that's trying to make their own comics and incorporating world building elements. It's perfect for you. Now, if you want to take this episode to the next level and you want some visuals to go along with the audio, check out the video version of this panel on the Shortbox YouTube channel. I'll link to that in the show notes. And while you're there, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to build this like YouTube. We're trying to just build, all right? We're trying to build a podcast and our YouTube presence. So subscribe and help us out there. And I hope you come back next week when the rest of the crew, I'm talking Cesar, Ashley, and Ed, when they come back to celebrate 30 years of Image Comics. We're going to be deep diving into one of the 4 OG comic series that helped establish the Image comic universe in 1992, all right? So we're talking 1992, the Spawn drops, Youngblood, Wildcat, Savage Dragon. I'm not going to say which one of those we're going to be deep diving. Our patrons know because they picked it. You'll have to come back next Wednesday to find out. It's going to be a fun episode. That's all I got to say. The music is fading away, so it's my time to bounce. You guys enjoy this episode and come back next week, all right? Peace. HeroesCon 2022. How are we feeling today? I feel it. I know it's Saturday. For those of you that were here yesterday, you guys probably had a full day as well. Yeah, I'm like running off of Red Bull and caffeine myself. And I know that we're just getting to know each other, but I've got this tradition when it comes to hosting panels, and I hope that I can get you guys to partake in this. I have a little bit of a competitive edge when it comes to panels, and I know that there is a panel taking place, I think, to the right of us, maybe even to the left of us. And I want the other two panels to be able to hear us and get jealous that they're not in this room with us. I want them to think that, damn, I really missed out. So I want to try that again, but if you guys will keep that in mind, that'd mean a lot to me, all right? So let me try that one more time. HeroesCon 2022, how are we feeling today? That's what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah, I know. I got you. Well, look, they beat me to it, but let's give another round of applause for our esteemed guests today, Charles Vess and David Petersen. That was a little early on that part. I want to thank all of you for taking time to attend this panel. I know I really appreciate it, and I can probably speak on behalf of our esteemed guests that they also share the same feeling. Before we really get started, I want to introduce myself to you guys as well. My name is Botter Milligan. I'll be hosting today's panel. I'm also the host of the long-running comic podcast, The Short Box, a.k.a. the best comic podcast in the multiverse. And I say that with a full 100% money-back guarantee. If you don't like the show for whatever reason, I'll refund you your money. The best part is the show is free, so that's a win-win for the both of us, all right? Terrible jokes aside, I do encourage you, if you like well-researched and entertaining discussions about comic books and reviews, as well as interviews with some of the best creators in the industry, check out The Short Box for your own when you get home. It's available on all podcast apps. But with that out the way, and you might hear this panel on the episode next week. So I highly encourage you to take part in the Q&A. At the end of it, I'll carve out about 30, maybe 20 minutes for Q&A for you guys to ask questions directly to Charles and David here. But welcome to World of Building with Charles Vess and David Petersen. Today's panel is going to be a fun, laid-back conversation between these two giants in the comic book industry.
Short giants.
Shortest giants you'll ever meet.
Yeah. But between these two gentlemen, we're talking close to, if not well over, 40 years of professional comic making experience. Both of them have a long list of... see, look, all that cheering brought more folks from the other panels. I'm telling you, it works every time. But both of these gentlemen have a long list of Eisner-nominated and winning bodies of work. They've got a dedicated fan base. Their work means a lot to a lot of different people, right? So we're fortunate enough to have both of these guys here. To talk about what they do best, you know. I don't think there's any hyperbole to be found if I was to say that they have helped lift and interlace traditional fantasy and world-building elements into comic book storytelling, which is usually, reserved, I think, for your classic kind of fiction prose. So it's cool to have their particular and unique element and signature brought into comics and really kind of uplifting the medium. So with all that out of the way, we're going to get on to our esteemed guests. Charles and David, thank you guys so much for being out here today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. They love you. How are your convention going so far? I imagine neither of you are strangers to HeroesCon at all. How's it going so far for you?
Great. Busy. Nice people.
Good to be
Easy
back.
drive. It's all good.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. And it sounds like both of you are no strangers to, the convention circuit or panels. And, we're here celebrating a major milestone for Heroes Convention or HeroesCon. It's their 40th anniversary. And I was curious to hear, what words come to mind when you think of the legacy of HeroesCon and the environment that they've built for not only, fans of the medium, but also creators as well. What do you think when you think of HeroesCon?
Fun and family people-friendly convention. That's easy to negotiate.
Yeah, I think of loyal fandom, and it's fans that are interested in finding comic material and discovering creators and really supporting creators. It's not just collectible gathering. It's not just collecting a popular character, just going around and whatever's Deadpool is what I want, or man, I'm gonna go get some toys, and that stuff's great too, but this is a convention where people either already know the artists and want to have that connection with them, or they're looking to discover a new artist and they want to make a connection with them.
Well said. I couldn't agree more. And maybe, David, you could take this question first, but do you think it's still important, for creators to meet, the fans and the people that support them, like, in person? And what benefits and challenges are there for, when it comes from the creator side, when it comes to attending conventions on a regular basis?
Yeah, of course it's important. I mean, it is easier now online that we can still meet. I stream on Twitch, twice a week, and I have lots of people that I recognize because of their names. Some of those people I know in real life, having done conventions and getting to meet them and know them in real life. But there are lots of people I just recognize because of a username. That's still a really good, valuable connection. But yeah, obviously being able to see each other in person and recognize faces and know backstories. There are people who tell me why they got the book or how they found the book or who they got the book for, and then I get to watch maybe a kid grow up over the years.
Yeah.
Or
yes,
we're humans. We're none of us are machines. This is all interactions. When I'm sharing a story,
you're going to fix that though.
When I'm sharing a story, it's because I'm trying to share something with you. So when you get to share something back by me getting to meet you, that's important.
Couldn't agree more. Charles, did you want to chime in on that question?
Well, I'm not online as you are, but so I'm in my studio by myself, and I might have 5 or 6 people that will come and visit over the 6 months I'm working on a project. So it's really nice to get out and get a real-time reaction to what you've done. And it's nice to talk to everyone. It's just, I enjoy it. So sometimes you're sitting there in the room by yourself going, is anyone ever going to read this?
Yeah, creation is a lonely process.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I've heard. So this next question I've got, and I think I probably speak on behalf of a lot of folks here. I know I've had a lot of fanboy moments of meeting my idols and people that I've looked up to and have studied throughout the years that have made me fall in love with this medium. I was curious if either one of you can recall a moment or tell a story where you had your own geek out moment or a hardcore fanboy moment of meeting, one of your contemporaries or professional idols.
Will Eisner. Years ago, I was at a science fiction convention and Ursula Le Guin was there, and I was too bashful to go talk to her because I thought, the only thing I'm going to be able to say is, gee, I really like your books. But that's okay to say that. And it meant that when I worked on this illustrated Earthsea book, and I worked with her emailing and talking on the phone for about 4 years, but I never got to meet her because she passed away right after the book was done. I was getting ready to fly out and see her. So, talk to your, heroes. And, most of the time they're really nice to talk to. Not always, but most of the time.
What was it like meeting, Will Eisner? What was that story like?
I was tongue tied. I'd grown up reading his books and, loved the spirit and loved his graphic novels. And, I was producing a self-published comic book, and various friends said, "You need to send a copy of it to him." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I do." So I did, and he wrote me back a really nice letter that I could take a few lines out and use for copying. So,
that's awesome. Is it framed? You got that letter framed anywhere?
No. It wasn't. I should. It's in my. I'm getting ready to move my studio. I'm building one on my property instead of renting one, and I'm clearing out lots of files. So there's a lot. There are all these letters that people wrote me in 1995 when I first started self-publishing, and you're like, I don't need this letter asking for a subscription to this comic book. You just don't need it.
Yeah.
So.
How many of you in here would help Charles Vess move his studio? There you go. You got a bunch of moving hands. Yeah, we got trucks right here, plenty of able bodies.
Well,
there you go.
My assistant at the booth, Nick, insisted on bringing lots and lots of books because he said, if we don't sell them there, I'm going to have to move them.
Everything's got to go 10% off, 50% off. I got it. And David, I've read that I've read a interview where you spoke very highly about Mike Mignola's influence on you. Did you ever have a chance to meet him, or maybe another comic hero?
Yeah, I've met him several times. I had met him even before I was a creator. Just as a fan, I got some stuff signed, and I didn't know, kind of like Charles. It's like, you want to go, like, what do you say?
Yeah, no.
And now as a creator, I also realize, like, there's no harm if people say, like, oh, I know you hear this all the time. I'm sorry for, I think your work's great. And it's like, why do you think I would ever get sick of hearing that?
I know.
That's a nice thing to say. Say it as much as you want.
Let me record it so I can just loop it back.
But you do worry, like, you're going to go up and be like, yeah, I'm the 50th person in this line to tell you that I really enjoy your work and I think it's great. So I was like, I got to come up with something. So I told him, I said, thanks for giving me a reason to go to the comic shop. And he went, well, thanks for going to the comic shop. And that was it. And I thought, like, well, at least that was a unique conversation. It was different than anybody else's. But the first time that I ever set up, was within the first year of Mouse Guard getting published. I was set up at San Diego, and I knew the guy who was directing the Hellboy animated series. And he said, I'm hanging out with the Mignolas at San Diego. I'm going to see if I can kind of direct them over by where you're sitting, and maybe they'll come by your booth. And I was like, oh yeah. So he's tall, and I saw the director is tall. I saw him, and he kind of like gave me the high sign. And the Mignolas came up, and Mike just kind of sat back. His wife Christine was doing more of the talking, and Mike just shook his head and he went, "You're a genius." And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, I've had lots more good interactions with him since, but it was like, yeah, if that's it, if we're done, I'm okay.
I'm surprised you haven't used that as a byline on a website or something. David Petersen, creator of Mouse Guard.
Yeah.
You're a genius. Mike Mignola.
There's something about keeping that one private. I mean, not private, like obviously I told you, but it's like, that one doesn't go in a book. That one goes in my heart.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I appreciate you for sharing that. HeroesCon, can we say thank you for that awesome story? For sharing that? That's what I like. So one thing that I enjoyed, getting to meet you guys for the first time today and doing my introduction was that both of you already have, you guys already know each other. You guys have met. There seems to be, some sort of, a relationship that you guys professionally, which is always nice for me, especially as the moderator that, there is a prior history that you guys know each other. So I was curious about that. Like, when did you guys first meet each other? Or what was your first conscious exposure to one another's work? And maybe, Charles, if you want to take that first.
It would have been Mouse Guard coming out, and I ordered it through my comic book shop, and I enjoyed it. So,
well, thank you.
You got my money. It was good. And,
that's right.
But probably here.
Yep.
Yes.
Smells like the 2000s.
It's right there.
I'm sure usually San Diego, you're going to see people, but it's, 10 billion people. So sometimes you don't get to talk to the people you wanted to. And which is another reason I like to come here, because you can actually talk to everyone that you want to talk to. So probably here that we really
actually our first it was San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't very long. You might not remember it. I remember it. I knew.
Tell me about it.
I knew your work because of Rose.
Right.
That was my exposure to you, and you were at San Diego, and you had a print, like a preview. It was almost like a print sample of Greenwood.
Oh, right. It was the chapbook.
Yeah. And it was this horizontal, and it was really interestingly printed. Like the cover stock was really nice. And I think it had even like a gold stamp.
Copper stamp.
Copper stamp on the cover. I was like, that's just really nice production design, even if it's just a sample or a sketchbook or whatever. And so, yeah, I knew your work. And
there were 300 of those. That's it.
I've still got one.
I got them printed at Kinko's.
Really?
Yes, and hand put together and various things glued on it. It was a definite
it looked nice.
Hands-on production.
Not that I'm not slagging off Kinko's, but that looked like a higher end production than Kinko's.
Yeah.
But yeah, I knew who you were, but my in was, let's talk about book production. Let's talk about paper and copper foil and placement of art versus text.
It's funny that you mentioned Rose, because Rose is why the Greenwood exists, because I was working on Rose, and I don't know, you've got this thing where if it's 2 months, it used to be if it's over 2 months late, then you have to resolicit. And Jeff called me up and said, okay, I know we're running behind, but we need to have this book done by the certain amount of time. So I spent about 3 weeks of 18-hour days at my studio painting the last issue of Rose. And I would take a break each day and walk on this walking trail that's near the studio. And the first day I was on the trail, it was fall. It was pretty. But way down the trail, there was a squirrel jumped out onto the path and started running toward me, and it had a big acorn in its mouth. And in my head, I'm going, oh, it's going to run up to me, drop it at my feet, and go, enjoy the quest, and run off. Of course, it didn't. It looked at me, big, scary human, and ran off. But from that moment on, a story started coming into my head. And when that happens, you don't be stupid and not listen to it. You start writing it down. And that's what the Greenwood came from that. So there you go. See, it all ties together. It's all one.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think a good transition to my next subject, across, both of your bodies of work, vast bodies of work, there's a sense of like richness and expansiveness in the characters, geography, as well as the history. So it's no surprise that, the powers that be have both of you on this panel, but it's also no surprise that they use world building. I think it comes to mind when you think of both of your names. And I was curious, what does world building mean to you, particular? Like, how does that word resonate with you? And David, if you want to take that first.
It's about making something that feels, even though we all know it's fiction, it feels real. And it feels believable between the characters. And it's everything. It's everything. And I don't mean that like, oh, it's everything. I mean like every element of what you're drawing or not drawing or writing about or not drawing about is world building. Like it's just as much what you include as what you don't include. It's about setting a tone and a vibe. It's this overall setting. It's like part of its genre, part of its architecture, part of its maps, but part of its culture, part of it's their history. Whether you're showing it or not showing it, it's there. It's how do you want to guide the audience to believe that it's real?
Well said.
To me, world building is part of this. The most important thing you do as a storyteller of getting the viewer or reader involved in the story. And if you don't get them involved, then you've lost. But one of the ways to do that, and just I came at this from definitely a visual thing, was, I would see paintings. There's a painter, N.C. Wyeth, that I love. And they'd have a figure standing there, and he's maybe looking or doing something, but there's a shadow going across him, and it's from some tree that is not shown. And that the viewer will look at that, and in their mind, they will think of what that tree looks like. So they are already building this world that you're involved in. And it's something you have to be aware of when you do it. It's just suggesting things. Shouldn't show everything, and have the viewer involved and part of the story, and then everything's good.
What would be some of your favorite, outside of, obviously your own bodies of work, but what are some of your favorite examples of world building, of someone that's like managed to accomplish that, in spades?
Yo, this is Botter. Sorry for interrupting this episode, but I'll keep it brief. I wanted to let you know about a massive sale we have going on over at the Shortbox store on all of our merchandise and apparel. That's theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com. You can now save 20% off your entire order using the discount code YOO, Y-O-O. So if you've been waiting for the right time to finally buy that gauntlet snapback, or if you ever wanted to buy any of the shirts you see me wear on the podcast, well, now's your chance to get them for a steal. We still have a few sizes left of everything, but they won't last long, and once they're gone, they are gone. And then I mentioned that all of our apparel is screen printed on high quality material. None of that heat transfer or direct to garment stuff. Our shirts are some of the most comfortable ones you'll ever wear, and the hats look even better in person. So wear your support for the Shortbox Nation proudly, knowing that you're going to look damn good doing it. Get to theshortboxstore.bigcartel.com as soon as you can, and don't forget to use that discount code YOO, Y-O-O, to save 20% off your entire order. All of this information can be found in this episode's show notes if you want to get there faster. Thanks for not pressing fast forward. Now back to the show.
Neither Charles nor I could figure out how to pronounce his name, but Rin Portlivet, I believe, is the closest I can get.
That sounds good.
He's the guy who illustrated the Gnomes book. If you're familiar with David the Gnome, which was an animated show, before David the Gnome was an animated show, there was Dutch,
a very popular book.
Yeah, a Dutch illustrator who painted this book that was almost like a field guide of here's gnomes and here's how they live and here's how they, and it's cutaways of their houses. It's showing their pottery. It's showing how they even like get the clay from the earth. How do they do medicine? How do they eat? What are their mating cultures? It's just like this full encyclopedia history about gnomes. And, that was a big one for me. And then I think the Dark Crystal is probably the other one where it's like, that is such an immersive world. And partly because, everybody talks about Labyrinth and Dark Crystal as like they go together. And it's like, but the thing about Dark Crystal that's unique is you never see a human being. You don't see a single part of a human being. Where, we saw David Bowie, we saw Jennifer Connelly. But that's how immersive the world of Thra from Dark Crystal is. It's so much its own thing. It could completely exist without any of us ever being a part of it. And the two distinct cultures of the Skeksis and the Mystics, and also this backstory about this genocide for the Gelflings. And it was like, it's all there. There's a whole world there. And it's only a, 90-minute movie.
And Charles, this one's for you. What's your approach to, starting or creating a world? Like, does it start with the characters of the geography or history or culture, like David brought up? Like, do you start somewhere specific, or do you go in a different direction?
I've done this any number of times. I wrote and drew and painted a Spider-Man graphic novel, Spirits of the Earth, and Stardust too. I would, before I even started drawing any of the characters, I would draw the city, the landscape, where they are. I want to know, where someone is in my head, so they're walking in the right place. With the Spider-Man, it was easy because I'd set it in this town of Plockton on the west coast of Scotland, and I'd spent a lot of time there, and I just so the city was the same. I put people that I knew there into the strip, and Stardust was a little harder, but Neil had described various things. But I worked out a city plan, village. It would be village because it's not a city, and all sorts of things. And then started drawing the characters. And I actually talk a lot about this. There's a book that came out last September called The Art of Stardust, and it's informal history of how the whole book came to be. And I talk a lot about where I came up with characters and where I developed things, and not just talked about it, I show it too. And I think I just like a sense of place a lot when I do things. I want to know what time of year it is. There's just a lot of questions I have when I approach a story. So.
That's a lot of things to juggle, a lot of things.
Yes.
And you brought up Spider-Man Spirits of the Earth. I remember when my dad first gave me that book, he was like, boy, let me show you what real art looked like. And I was like, I was really young, I was like, Dad, it's Spider-Man in Scotland. How cool can it really be? It blew my mind as a young kid, What's he going to swing from? There's no buildings.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was why I put him there.
All right. So you're both no stranger to reinterpreting classic literature into comic form for a modern audience. I think Wind of the Willows, Books of the Earth Sea, and maybe David, if you want to kick us off for this one. But is it easier or more challenging to take on the task of reinterpreting from classic literature than, say, working from a traditional comic script or writing in that method?
Oh, Mouse Guard's easier than Wind of the Willows was. And Wind of the Willows wasn't a comic. The original prose by Kenneth Graham, and I illustrated it. And it was a bucket list. Wind of the Willows was a bucket list project. I knew that I always, at some point before I died, I wanted to illustrate Wind of the Willows. And I got my chance to do it. But it was way harder from that, how do you approach this standpoint than Mouse Guard. Mouse Guard is exactly what I want it to be and can change based on my whim of what I want it to be. You know, what I want it to be this year is probably different than what I wanted it to be 6 years ago or even 3 years ago. And sometimes that can even change month to month. Like, I'm more in this mood, so this is the way Mouse Guard's going to go, both in tone and, you know, style and everything. Wind in the Willows had to be consistent, had to also follow this tradition of the hundreds of other Wind in the Willows illustrators who have already tackled all these same moments. It's not just the characters. There are moments in the book that when you read I read the book, I made a list every time I got to a point.
Hyper at the Gates of Dawn.
Well, but you get to a point where you're like, okay, that's an illustratable moment. That's an illustratable moment. And I made this list. And then when you know that you only have 70 illustrations to do, only 70, but you only have 70, you start narrowing it down to which are the most important. And guess what? Those are the same 70 that every other illustrator has done. So now illustrate that exact moment from that book in a way that doesn't feel derivative of anybody else, that's uniquely you, but also is paying service to the original text and kind of the general mood spirit of what we all understand Wind in the Willows to be. It was frustratingly hard.
And when you're illustrating something that millions of people have read over many, many years, and they've all got their own idea of what these characters look like, you have to it's a little tiptoeing around trying to make sure you don't destroy their imagery.
Yeah. And it was actually less about the character designs. That I felt like I could have a little more freedom with. Although there's a character called the Wayfarer, which is a like Ratty from Wind in the Willows. Actually isn't a rat. He's a water rat, which means he's a muskrat.
Right.
But Ratty meets a rat that's like a ship's rat, like basically a New York City rat, but one that would live in the hull of a ship. Everybody draws that rat pretty much the same. Like he has the same costume, no matter which. Like we've all decided, okay, he's a side character. This is how we know it's him. He's wearing these clothes. Everybody does it. So it's like, all right, I already know the costume for the guy. I just have to draw him. And the other ones, it's like, yeah, you're going to give Toad a waistcoat or a sweater vest or just a blazer. It's all going to work no matter how you draw it. But it was like with Mouse Guard, I cherry pick for architectural and furniture and things like that. Like if I want a certain building to look actually medieval, okay. But if I also want to look at like Tudor revival from the 1920s, which actually, I think to modern audiences looks more castle-like than actual castles, I can cherry pick. I can do that. I can even pull in some arts and crafts references, some Gothic references. Historically, none of it makes sense, but it's Mouse Guard, and the mice made it, and so now it does make sense. But Wind in the Willows takes place at a very specific time. So I had to research Edwardian doors, windows, clothes, cars, pub signs, cupboards. Like I was making miniature replica furniture based on real furniture because I had to draw Badger's kitchen from a certain angle. I was like, okay, well, now I got to become a Edwardian furniture expert. Although Badger is kind of an old man hermit, so maybe he doesn't have Edwardian furniture. He has older furniture, and he hasn't updated. So Wind in the Willows was hard.
To say the very least. Nothing to get the creative juices going than reading a nice, hearty book about Edwardian furniture. Wouldn't you agree? So it's been eye-opening to hear you guys talk about the level of detail and how many levels there is to world building. David, I really liked you bringing up culture. That is an element that could really, I think, make or break the believability of a world. So I was curious, and maybe Charles, you can kick us off. But in your words, what's your advice for someone who wants to take on the task of creating a fantasy epic or building a world? Like, should it be a conscious effort to first have the world built out, or should that come in a process or later in stages? Are there any like quantifiable or pivotal elements that they shouldn't, like a checklist or something? Or is it just inherent because of the genre itself?
Well, first I would say, do not make it medieval Europe. Because there's a billion pseudo-medieval Europes.
And if you do, make the population animals.
Yes. And there's loads of civilizations and that are really interesting, that's really fun to look around at. And then just do a lot of research, forget about it, and write. And there are things that come into play. I have a novel coming out in September called The Queen of Summer's Twilight. And it's set in contemporary Inverness, Scotland, and then goes over into Faerie. And I planned out this certain scene, and they were going to go into the deserted palace of the Queen of Elfland. And I started writing the golden spires and all that stuff, and then I went, that's really boring. How many people have written about the golden spires of Elfland? And then I started thinking about it and this whole Celtic thought of the health of the leader is represented by the health of the country. And my Queen of Elfland had given her mind away because of circumstances in the book, and she was mad and gibbering. So I went, oh, that means the whole country is the ground is dead, the trees are dead, the palace might be crumbling, and it became much more interesting to describe all that. And it just was like, because I was really bored with writing the golden spires of Elfland, and it became a really very strong element in the book, and I just worked off of it.
If your world building attempt is because of a narrative, well, let me start the other way. If your world building attempt is because you are creating a playable RPG setting, then do that. Like, plot every point on the map, figure out everything about how that place works, leave no stone unturned. If you are writing a narrative, do not do that. You should almost, like, you can have vague ideas. I did make a map, but my map was literally like Lockhaven, the most important place for where my purposes, is in the center. And then I just put a bunch of dots and made up a bunch of names. And I thought, the rest will come to me. That's it. And then when my characters explore those places, that's when I now have to do the work. But if I tried to do the other stuff, I'm going to end up like the friend of mine who wanted to come up with a D&D campaign that wrote a 1,000-year history for our D&D campaign that we never actually played, because what he really just made was a history binder of some fictional world that nobody cared about. There was no entry point. This is more of a storytelling kind of a piece of advice, but you as the author have ideas for the story that are running at full speed. You've been sitting with this story in your mind. You know it. You understand it. Someone who's coming in who doesn't have that history doesn't know it. Things that are obvious to you aren't obvious to them. So I always relate it to like car traffic. Your mind is moving at freeway speed. Your audience is just pulling out of the driveway. It's not fair to ask them to be driving 60 miles an hour or 70 miles an hour yet. You have to give them some side roads and an entry ramp up onto your story. You have to have characters that slowly introduce them to this. Don't give them a wall of text that reads like an atlas or a history lesson. Introduce them with characters and story that they care about, and then let the world building blossom and go out.
I love that analogy. That's awesome. That's good. Another one for the both of you. Comic books aside, Edwardian Furniture Digest aside, can you give us maybe some what you would consider must-read fantasy deep cuts? So thinking off like the main path of, when people think fantasy books, what are some of your favorite deep cuts that you think people should check out?
Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake which is kind of like Charles Dickens writing a very strange fantasy novel. The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, which has the most beautiful words in the world. The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which just with her choice of words and description changes a lot of fairy tales that you've read a million times. If anyone has ever seen The Company of Wolves, the movie, The Company of Wolves, was co-written by Angela, and it's based on one of her short stories. But the Bloody Chamber is a really gorgeous book. And I mean, Lord of the Rings, Earthsea, that's pretty good.
Good stuff.
I know you said comics aside, although the book that I'm going to recommend, while it's a comic, it's not like a comic you've ever seen. Cursed Pirate Girl by Jeremy Bastian. I'm actually wearing. It's Jeremy's birthday today, by the way. If you go by his table, tell him a happy birthday. I'm wearing a Cursed Pirate Girl shirt.
Awesome.
It's a nautical fairy tale adventure, and it is illustrated. Basically, imagine Albrecht Dürer is illustrating a comic book. It's amazingly detailed, and it is world building beyond. I have Jeremy's a good friend of mine. I have harassed him for years that he needs to do a creator commentary, because I've had the pleasure of getting to watch him make pages, or have him tell me, show me pages in person, and then he starts pointing out details, and he starts telling stories about like, oh, see all the stuff in the border? Well, this one's chasing this one because he stole and I'm like, where is that in the book? Where's that story? And he's like, it's there. It's just, it's there in the border. I'm like, but you need to write all this stuff down so that everybody else can eventually know it when you're dead. So he told me that when he's done with the book, he'll do a director's cut commentary. I'm trying to get him to do it before then, just in case.
Yes, he should. He should.
But I think that's like not enough people know about it, and it's just an amazing example. And then my deep cut fantasy that's not a comic is a book called Crow and Weasel. It was written by Barry Lopez and illustrated by Tom Port. It's a Native American kind of tale, coming of age story, where it's the illustrations have very human bodies, but anthropomorphized heads of a crow and a weasel. And it's the anthropomorphic tradition where it's not even so much that they are a crow and a weasel. It's that things that go along with what we associate with a crow is the personality of crow, and things that we associate about the personality of a weasel is the personality of weasel.
Good stuff. All right, I've got one last question for you guys from me before I open it up to the audience for Q&As. I'm going to bring it back to comic books, right? And I was curious about your advice for aspiring comic creators. What's something that you wish you were told when first entering the industry that might have made your lives a lot easier? Charles, you just laughed. You just laughed like, do we add another hour on this panel?
Yeah, there'll be that. Don't work for Marvel. Don't work for Disney. Let's see. What else?
Shots fired. Shots fired.
You won't get money, royalties. I did comic books for DC Comics in 1990, and every 4 months since then, I've gotten a royalty check. It's a very nice thing. I did, wrote and drew and painted the Spider-Man graphic novel. I got 2 checks, and then they just decided to forget about the other 100,000 copies that they sold. And they just look at you going, you can sue us. So that would be my advice. Work for yourself. Do what you want to do. Do what's in your heart. Every once in a while, you need to do something big and splashy, but most of the time you need to, just do the story that's inside that needs to come out of your head.
Excellent.
Yeah. The barriers for entry, like people talk about how do you get into the industry or how do you make comics? And it's like the answer is you make comics.
Yeah.
You draw stories, get them finished, and then publish them online, self-publish them, print on demand. Like there's no gatekeepers anymore. Sure, it's going to take some work to get noticed and build a good body of work, but the way you do that is by starting. Like nobody comes out fully formed. You do some stuff that's not your greatest work. And then the next one, you try to make better than that. And you just keep going. If you wait until you're ready, you're never going to be ready.
That was great advice. Great advice. Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause for that. That was well said. Excellent. All right. I'm going to take it to you guys to get some questions. You guys can dive deep for these and, let's get some answers. All right. Hey, how you doing? Give me your name and then your question.
It's Bernadette. I'm currently dressed as a storytelling cobbler. And one of the things that I really want to appreciation for is the desire to increase diversity in comics. And you're talking about, let's try to get stories that don't involve, medieval Europe. But how do you do that when, you're coming from a European background? Genetically, where do you find that balance without, as you're talking about, you're saying that there's no gatekeepers, but, if you're, try to represent a culture that you don't come from, you get criticized. If you try to write just from your own culture, there's criticism. How do you find that respectful balance of trying to improve diversity as it's represented, trying to, like I said, show the stories that you want to see represented? I mean, have you?
About maybe 8 years ago, I published a book with a fairy magazine because I knew that they would publish it exactly the way I wanted it. And there was only 2 people to have to deal with. And, they did a beautiful job of this book. And it's my art and poetry. And I was looking at it and I didn't think about it till I had the book and I was leafing through it the first time and went, okay, there's 100 pages here and there's one person of color. And that made me feel really awful. So I actually repainted one of the paintings that's in the book, but it's not in the, it's from the book, but it's not in the book because that was already, if they go back to press again, there will be, it'll be in there. But there's a whole lot of people that want to be gatekeepers. And there's a lot of people that want to be upset. I don't know why, but they want to be upset and they want to be angry. I had the novel that I was talking about, The Queen of Summer's Twilight. The major character is half Scottish and half Jamaican, and it went through 2 agents who said, "I don't know what to do with this book because you'll be killed if you put this out." So unaided, I found a publisher that wanted to print it in a smaller press in England, and you just have to do as much research as you can and talk to as many friends that may be of that ethnicity, and be respectful and write your story. If that's the story you want to tell, just tell it.
If you're worried that your cast isn't diverse enough because you are kind of locked into a geographic location, you have to ask yourself, am I doing a historical document or am I doing a fantasy? Because if you're doing a fantasy, we love doing the elevator pitch of it's this plus this. So if you want to show kind of a normal European medieval town, but then bring in where the denizens are more like Native Americans and bring that culture, but to that setting, that's interesting, right? So you can populate it however you want. Rainbow diverse, where there's, 2 of everybody, or just a totally different group that's a mishmash, or maybe even that there's only one person of color and that's part of the story. Like, however you want to do it. It's what story you want to tell. And then in terms of being worried about stepping on toes or not being respectful, come from a place of earnestness. And I would say not just talk to your friends that are people of color or part of those groups. If you have opportunities to talk to other creators who are in those groups, and it's always okay to come from an earnest place of, I don't know. Like if you go to somebody and say, hey, I'm worried about this, and just talk to me because I don't know. I don't know the answer. Can you help me find the answer? That's the best place to start.
Excellent. Great advice. Good question, too. All right, next up. What's your name and what's your question?
So my name is John, and you mentioned earlier, like there's a long tradition in fantasy and that kind of media of not humans being involved in the scenario and the environment. And you mentioned, like I said earlier, about Crow and Weasel. They have certain personalities that you associate with those animals that tend to influence how you portray those characters. So I was wondering how not human characteristics and ideas that are associated with them help and hurt the world building process. Because if, you got your classic depiction of a dwarf, well, if you don't mix in certain elements like, obviously I work with stone, or what if they don't? But is it helpful because you have more of a focus, or does it hurt because it gets in the way of telling the story and the world?
So the danger with whatever you populate your world with, whether it's non-humans like trolls and goblins, or if it's and fairies, or if it's different animals, the problem is always going to exist of other. There's a group, and then there's obviously something not of that group. So, and anthropomorphized fiction always has this problem. If your protagonists are things like mice, then obviously weasels, snakes, things like that are the bad guys. And that's a tradition we're all used to, right? But there is the danger, because people start to read it as a human metaphor. There is the danger that what you're actually saying is a weasel is born a weasel. There's nothing they can do about that, and we've already determined they're the bad guys. So now we've decided that an entire race is just born evil. Well, if we try to translate that back as a metaphor for humans, that's really not okay, right? So with Mouse Guard, I've tried my own way to both make that tradition work, but also go, hey, as a metaphor, I'm kind of shuffling the deck a little so that it's not just a hard and fast rule. But no matter what it is, there's going to be your goblins, and then there's going to be people outside of a goblin community that they're not going to trust. Right? And then you've got this problem. You've got somebody and an other. And you got to be careful with that about what you're actually saying, and figuring out where it's okay for it just to be a fairy tale, and where it could also be misinterpreted as a morality lesson, an actual human morality lesson.
Solid stuff.
What he said. Really. It's really good.
Well said. Awesome. All right, how you doing? What's your name and what's your question?
I'm Gary Rogers. All right. Well, I wanted to ask you about environmental storytelling. As a creator myself, I noticed one of my weaknesses is that, my mind's eye is fairly limited. If it doesn't need to be in the scene, it won't be in the scene, which kind of is like the inverse of world building disease, where they don't have enough information. As you said, the deep dive you did into the Edwardian architecture and furniture design and clothing.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I was about to ask, is there a point? When do you know when to stop?
Well, I had to do that because it was Wind in the Willows, but just in general, don't do that. When do you know when to stop? So every, who was it that had that thing about, was it Toth who drew something and said, I spent the first half of my career putting too many lines in, and it was the second half of my career figuring out which ones I could leave out.
Yeah.
It was something along those lines. But everything that goes into an illustration conveys something, right? There's something about minimalism that's conveying a certain amount of story. It's actually leaving gaps for the reader to fill in, which means that everybody's experience reading that could be slightly different because they're filling in those gaps with their own mind. And there's a benefit to that kind of storytelling. But if you as a storyteller are like, no, my audience isn't getting what I'm trying to put across, the mood, the genre, the setting just isn't coming across, then you need to add more details. The place where you go too far is where you're not actually producing story anymore because you're just drawing backgrounds, or you're just doing research or building models of Edwardian furniture. Don't do that.
And how much of this furniture did you build?
Enough. One step past enough, actually.
Okay.
Just one step
Okay.
past enough.
Charles, you had to shake your head when in agreement when David brought up that point. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. I mean,
What he said, right?
Let me ask you this. So sometimes, Charles, you'll draw every twist, every turn, every knot, every root of a tree. And other times they fade off into the background.
right.
Where do you decide within each illustration what's going to be a very concrete, detailed part of it and what's not? Maybe that's a better way of
maybe,
when do you put it in, when don't you?
When is enough, Charles?
When is enough? Well, I leave more and more not there. And it's because I find as I grow older, the artists that I really respond to aren't putting every single detail in a piece. I don't know if any of you will know these people. There's I went to dinner with Steranko last night and a whole bunch of other people, and there was this whole conversation going on. And I woke up in the middle of the damn night having a conversation with him in this dream about artists that I liked, and I'm going, what? Why am I here?
He has that effect on people. I'm telling you.
But there's Lorenzo Matati, who's an Italian artist that almost expressionistic, extreme colors, and I look at those and it's so far away from what I do. That's one of the things I would suggest as a creator is looking at stuff, reading stuff that has nothing to do with what you do. And it sort of filters back in. I look at Hergé, who did Tintin, and it's completely different than anything I'd ever drawn. Sometimes I wish I drew like that. I look at Tove Johannesson, who did the Moominland, and sometimes I want to be able to draw like that, but I don't. But you can look at those things and figure out what they're leaving out that works, and think about that. And sometimes it doesn't happen overnight, and it'll just filter into your drawing, whether I leave a misty tree or not is usually just by patience or deadline.
By whim.
It's whim. It's a lot of whim.
If like we actually went in the opposite direction. We talked about when to leave stuff out. If you're struggling for figuring out how to get more in, I would say have a folder or a couple folders on your desktop of inspiration things, and they can be lots of stuff. They can be photos you take when you're out on walks. They can be photos that you just grab off the internet. Take photos of objects. Go through an antique store and take photos of a bunch of stuff that you think is cool. Go to or any store.
It used to be the hardest thing in the world because you would have to. There was no internet, and you had to go buy books or magazines. I can still remember buying this giant pamphlet magazine on guns because I needed to know what this one particular gun looked like. And nowadays you just type it into Google and there it is. There's 100 pictures of it. And you're like, oh God, thank you.
Almost like basically do a Pinterest board, but keep it private, keep it on your desktop. And you'll actually start to see patterns of what you're drawn to, what you're inspired by. And don't think that you have to create every background or everything like just out of your mind, like looking at a blank piece of paper and then just drawing it or writing it. You can look at a bunch of stuff to get inspired and reference. You don't have to have it.
If you're doing a graphic narrative, you don't have to put everything into every panel. Sometimes a blank background. You have to remember that people are reading it and your eyes get tired, especially if you're old. And white background is a very nice thing.
I'm actually trying to apply that. I'm actually an animator. So I'm trying to figure out how we can use blank backgrounds without it looking like it just got lazy.
Well, a lot of that's negative and positive space. And
Gennady Tartakovsky is going to be the animation person you're going to need to look for how to do minimalism that doesn't look lazy.
I'm glad of that. Thank you.
Good answers.
You're welcome.
Good questions. Good answers. Thank you, guys. All right. We got 2 more questions. Going to give me your name and your question.
My name is Chris Ewan. Since you brought him up, and he's also well known for his world building, I wanted to ask about Mike Mignola. Amongst people that I know that are artists, Mike Mignola has this godlike standard or reverence for his art. With you guys, it's very obvious to even the lay people why your work is fantastic. It's very accessible. But when you introduce somebody that is not familiar with Mike Mignola's work, it's harder for them to see why he's so great. And so my question is, if you were talking to a layperson and sharing with them Mike Mignola's work, what is it that you're picking out of that work that a layperson would then be able to start seeing that would help them appreciate work that's like his as opposed to yours, which has those intricacies and those types of things that obviously people recognize immediately?
Mike's greatest skill as a world builder is mood. It's there from panel one, and it goes all the way through. And even though I know he wouldn't call his comics work effortless, I think him injecting everything he draws with mood, I do think that's effortless for him. It just oozes out of him. So you know exactly the feel and genre, how spooky or even not spooky any particular moment in that book is, because it's right there the minute you look at it. Some of the other stuff is harder to appreciate as a layperson without studying it. His beat by beat storytelling, how many panels it takes to tell something, to tell a moment. Sometimes he'll stretch it out into multiples. Sometimes things happen very quickly. How he does that, what shapes those panels are, how big those characters are within those panels. Mike Mignola, I think, is one of the best storytellers, and I think that's not the thing he gets credit for. He gets credit for the big shadows and design work, and he's great at that stuff too. But his panel-by-panel storytelling, I still think, is one of the best in the business.
And he uses that European thing of you'll have really brilliant storytelling, and then there'll be a little tiny panel of a limb with a leaf on it.
Yep.
And it's just, and that is that's storytelling, because you're pausing and you're taking a breath, and then you're going to the next thing, and it's something you have to think about when you're.
It's almost like a German or Norwegian filmmaking technique.
It's Herman Hupen.
Okay.
Who did the Towers of Bois Marie he's a Belgian artist who's a brilliant storyteller. Love his work. And
then I wanted to be Mignola for a really long time, and I tried really hard to draw like Mignola, and it's a futile thing, because even if I got really good at it, at best I'd be a second-rate Mignola. But what that meant was I really studied. People will look at his work and go, okay, he's all about skinny wrists and big blocky shadows. And you're taking the wrong thing away. It's like looking at a house and appreciating its siding or the shutters. Like there is a structure and a foundation and a proportion to what size the windows are and where the stairs are in the building and everything. So if you actually start like literally doing draw-overs and figuring out the proportions of everything in a panel and where he's drawing your eye and how even though he doesn't color, I know he has hour-long conversations with his colorist, because he has a very specific color story in his mind of how the color is going to affect mood and where he wants people's eyes to be going. That's the kind of stuff that trying to get someone who's not familiar with his work to appreciate his genius is really hard, because it actually does require deeper study. But that's one of the things. That's why he's like an artist. That's why among all of us, we're like, oh man, Mignola. But it's because we've dissected it and gone, Jesus Christ, he's a genius. Like all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. It's just genius.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite phrases I've heard in describing Mike Mignola is deceptively simple.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
Good question.
And it would help if you somehow found a way to explore lots of the European graphic novels, because his sensibility is more. It's a really interesting. It's Frazetta and European sensibility mixed together. It's unlike anybody else.
If you're trying to get somebody to appreciate Mignola too, don't hand them one of the giant tomes, or don't hand them like one of the big long stories. Hand them one of those real short ones, one of those like 10 to 12 pagers. The Troll Witch is one of the ones that I love sharing with people. I also think it's one of the best examples of his panel by panel storytelling in terms of dissecting how many beats for each moment and how much text versus image and how that flows. Troll Witch is one of his best like go-to lesson plan stories.
And if they like breakfast, give them pancakes. That story.
It's only 2 pages, though.
All right, we got another question up here. Give me your name and your question.
My name is Matthew. Are there any particular worlds or works that you would like to illustrate or would like to return to illustrating? Particularly Charles, I would like to know if you ever considered working with Jeff Smith again, because Rose was so remarkable to me as a kid, which earlier you guys talked about how when you're adapting a work that has already been illustrated, you need to bring your own thing to it. And I'm sure you're aware of how your style differentiates from Jeff Smith's. He's very clean. You're so painterly in comparison. And it gave me this whole different perspective of the setting of Bone. It was so beautiful and historical. And just, I don't know. I really want to see how that combines again.
Well, we had other stories that we talked about. It just hasn't happened. But the reason why that happened is that my wife and I were visiting, he and his wife, and we were walking through Old Man's Cave, which is an actual state park in Ohio, and it's where a lot of Bone takes place. And at a certain point, I went, well, Jeff, is there a backstory to all this? And he rattled off this amazing story. And I went, afterwards going, are you going to draw that? He went, no, I just came up with it all. And I went, well, can I draw it?
So you need to go vacation with Jeff Smith again, so we'll get another Charles Vess Bone.
We were supposed to have the tagline of pure fantasy, no bones about it. Never used it, but it was a good one. And it was really fun. His writing is actually extremely simple layouts with word balloons in there. And it was a really fun relationship.
Good stuff. David, what about you? Is there a dream project that you hope to illustrate one day? Or one that's on your bucket list?
I mean, I really need to be spending as much of my time doing mouse guard as possible. So doing like a whole issue of anything is too much of a commitment, I think. That said, I wouldn't mind at some point if the stars align doing a Turtles issue. I would love to do a Turtles issue. Turtles are the reason that I draw comics. That was the book that made me realize that people make comics and not a company. Mm-hmm. It said right on the cover, Eastman and Laird. And then you start reading it and you're like, this is 2 guys making this crap up. This is awesome. Well, that's a job? I want that job.
I remember seeing, maybe it was the first issue of Fantastic Four I ever bought was either 4 or 6. I don't know which one. But, it had Stan Lee and Jack Kirby signed, and I went, well, people did this. Yeah. I've been reading comics for years, and it never occurred to me that people wrote and drew it, and that it was like, well, if they could do it, I can do that. Changed my life.
And then I've gotten a chance to do Turtles covers and Usagi covers and a Lock and Key cover. I'd be happy to return to any of those. And one of the ones that is not checked off on my list yet is Hellboy. I'd love to do a Hellboy cover.
Good stuff. All right. Last question. We're going to finish strong, right? You're going to give me your name and your question.
Hi, I'm Cal. I was just hoping, as a starting artist, not me, but just in general, how did you find your style, and what are some things that you think would be helpful to new artists that would help them find said style?
To plug myself, I have a whole lecture of this up on YouTube called Drawing Like Yourself. At least this is my theory about style. The short version of it is that people kind of mystify what style means. And the simple explanation is style is the way you draw. And the real question is, how can I draw better? How can I take what I'm doing and get rid of the flaws in it, which means making it more readable, expressing the things you want to actually express, not making distracting points where people think you're not drawing something well. There's a version of a bad drawing of a face where when somebody looks at it, they go, that person doesn't know how to draw a face. But when we think of it as, oh, that's a style, it's where that doesn't become distracting. It's artistically valid. And what it really just means is it's all the same stuff that we talk about good drawing, whether it's abstract or realistic. It's about proportion and balance and how to make something readable and conveyable. Mm-hmm. So you have everybody in here, if you draw or paint, you have a style. You don't need to go find it. You have it. It's the way you draw right now. If you're not happy with the work that you're doing and you need to figure out better ways to make your work more successful, start solving those problems on an artistic basis. Then that's your new style. But it's not like you found it's not like you go shopping and you're like, oh, I think I want something more minimalistic. I'll take one of those. And, it's like the thing with Mignola where I go, people look at it and they go, oh, big blocky shadows, skinny wrists. That's Mignola. No, it's not. Look at the foundation of what he's doing. Look at the foundation of what you're doing. Change it so that your work is more successful in terms of artistic merit. It can be as abstract and wonky looking as you want. It can be as realistic and photo real as you want, or anywhere in between. It just needs to be a successful piece of art. So how can you take what you're doing right now and make it better?
Never be afraid to use an eraser. Best tool any artist ever has.
Good stuff. Yeah, let's go and give it up. Those were some great questions. I appreciate all of you for being here today, for sitting in. David, Charles, thank you guys so much for your time. You mentioned shameless plugs. I love a good shameless plug, and I'll do one on behalf of you guys. Please make sure if you want to meet these guys in person or tell them how great they are for yourselves, please stop by their table. I think you guys are fairly pretty close to one another, like maybe just a little bit of space in between.
We're both right at the front of Indie Island, where the gold tablecloths are.
Fantastic, fantastic. My name is Botter Milligan. That was our panel for today. Let's give it up one more time for our esteemed guests. Give it up for yourselves. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your con, all right?